Blood stained the cobblestones, and the kingdom's most feared alpha was seconds away from tearing his own commander's throat out. Then a lowly tavern maid stepped into the moonlight. She didn't run. She didn't scream. She simply touched his snarling snout, and the monster dropped to his knees. The year was 1342, and the kingdom of Ethalgard was a harsh, unforgiving place, especially for those born without a title. In the muddy, bustling village of Oak Haven, the center of the world was a sprawling, smoke-filled tavern known as the Boar and Barrel. It was here that Mave spent her days, her hands calloused from hauling heavy oak casks and her dresses perpetually smelling of stale ale, with smoke and roasted mutton. Mave was 21, with hair the color of spun copper and eyes like struck flint. She was no fragile maiden. Surviving under the employment of Garrett, the tavern's foul-mouthed and heavy-handed proprietor, required a spine of steel. She knew how to break up a brawl with a well-aimed iron skillet, and she knew how to navigate the leering stares of drunken mercenaries. But nothing could have prepared her for the night the royal court descended upon her miserable corner of the world. King Leoric of the House of Vane did not belong in a roadside tavern. He was a man chiseled from marble and ice, standing a full head taller than any man in the room. His reputation preceded him. A ruthless tactician, a cold-hearted ruler, and a man who had never been seen to smile. Rumors whispered that the blood of ancient beasts ran in the Vane lineage, a dark curse that gave them unnatural strength and terrifying ferocity in battle. But to the common folk, these were merely stories meant to frighten children. It was the eve of the autumn equinox. A torrential downpour had forced Leoric and his retinue, including his most trusted confidant and commander, Rowan, to seek shelter. When the king's boots kicked open the heavy oak doors of the Boar and Barrel, the raucous laughter died instantly. The lute player stopped mid-strum. Silence, thick and suffocating, descended upon the room. "Clear the best tables," Rowan commanded, his voice slicing through the quiet. "The king requires hot meals, strong drink, and absolute quiet." Garrett, sweating profusely, shoved Mave forward. "Serve them," he hissed. "And if you spill a single drop, I'll have you whipped." Mave approached the king's table carrying a heavy iron tray laden with roasted fowl, thick crusts of bread, and flagons of dark mead. Leoric sat at the head of the table, his dark cloak dripping rainwater onto the muddy floorboards. His eyes, a startling, piercing amber, were fixed on the hearth fire, burning with an intensity that made the hair on the back of Mave's neck stand up. He radiated a dangerous heat, an energy that felt less human and more like a coiled predator waiting to strike. As Mave leaned over to place a heavy flagon before the king, a drunken patron from a neighboring table, a foolish merchant who had consumed far too much courage, stumbled backward, knocking hard into Mave's elbow. The heavy flagon tipped. Dark, sticky mead splashed directly onto King Leoric's immaculate, fur-lined leather tunic. The tavern gasped as one. The merchant who had bumped her went pale and instantly dropped to his knees, scurrying away like a rat. Mave froze, her heart hammering against her ribs, but she did not cower. She quickly grabbed a clean rag from her apron. "Forgive me, your grace," she said, keeping her voice steady as she reached out to dab at the spill. Before the cloth could touch him, Leoric's hand shot out, his fingers wrapping around her wrist with the crushing force of a steel vice. Mave let out a sharp gasp, the bones in her arm grinding together. Leoric slowly turned his gaze to her. His amber eyes flashed with an unnatural, luminescent ring of gold. "Do not touch me, filth," he snarled, his voice a low, rumbling baritone that vibrated in Mave's chest. "I was only trying to clean the spill, sire," Mave replied, refusing to lower her gaze, even as pain shot up her arm. Leoric scoffed, a cruel, mocking sound that echoed through the silent tavern. He released her wrist, shoving her back slightly. "Clean it with what? The mud from your skirt? You reek of pig swill and desperation. Wench, it offends the senses. You are nothing but dirt beneath my boots, a peasant who cannot even perform the simple task of carrying a cup. Get out of my sight before I have my guards feed you to the hounds." Rowan, sitting beside the king, shifted uncomfortably. Leoric, he murmured, a warning in his voice. Control. Leoric ignored him. His eyes locked on Mave, waiting for her to break, to cry, to beg for mercy like everyone else did. But Mave simply stood tall, rubbing her bruised wrist. She looked at the king, seeing past the velvet and the crown. She saw the tension in his jaw, the slight trembling of his hands, and the erratic, heavy rise and fall of his chest. He wasn't just angry. He was fighting something inside himself. "I may be dirt, your grace," Mave said, her voice ringing clear in the deadly silence. "But dirt is what builds kingdoms, and even a king must walk upon it." Rowan inhaled sharply. Garrett let out a frightened whimper from behind the bar. Leoric's eyes widened ever so slightly. The golden rings around his irises flared brighter. A low, guttural growl, one no human throat should have been able to produce, vibrated from his chest. The temperature in the room seemed to plummet. For one terrifying second, Mave saw his fingernails elongate, digging deep into the oak table and splintering the wood. Then Leoric abruptly stood, his chair crashing to the floor. "I need air," he rasped, his voice strained and unnatural. He turned and stormed out of the tavern, bursting through the front doors into the howling storm. Outside, the rain lashed the muddy streets of Oak Haven. Inside the tavern, the patrons slowly began to breathe again. A trembling Garrett immediately sent Mave to the kitchens, ordering her to stay out of sight lest the king return to finish her off. But out in the darkness, a different kind of storm was brewing. Lord Alaric of the Northern Marches, a bitter rival of the House of Vane, had long suspected the dark secret of the royal bloodline. He had paid a small fortune to a guild of assassins to track the king, waiting for the perfect moment when Leoric would be vulnerable outside the impenetrable walls of the capital. And Alaric hadn't armed them with steel alone. He had armed them with silver. Mave was scrubbing a cast-iron pot in the back kitchen when the first scream pierced the night. It was followed by the clash of steel, the frantic shouting of men, and the horrifying wet sound of tearing flesh. Mave dropped her scrub brush. She grabbed the heavy wooden rolling pin from the counter, the only weapon she had, and rushed toward the front of the tavern. She pushed through the terrified patrons huddled against the walls and peered through the smeared glass of the tavern window. The courtyard had become a battlefield, illuminated by flashes of lightning. Rowan and the king's guards fought desperately against a dozen cloaked assassins. But the assassins weren't focused on the guards. They were circling a massive, hulking shape standing in the center of the mud. Lightning cracked across the sky, flooding the courtyard with brilliant white light. Mave's breath caught in her throat. It was a wolf, but not a normal wolf. The beast stood more than 7 feet tall on its hind legs, its fur black as the abyss, rippling over thick, unnatural muscles. Its eyes burned like twin suns, glowing with the same terrifying amber light Mave had seen in the king's eyes only an hour before. King Leoric had lost control. The silver-tipped arrow protruding from his massive shoulder had triggered the agonizing, primal transformation he usually kept locked away deep within the royal vaults during the full moon. Now the Alpha King was unleashed. The beast was a nightmare of violence. With a single swipe of its massive claws, it sent an assassin flying through the air, his chest ripped open. The wolf's jaws snapped shut on another man's neck, crushing armor and bone with sickening ease. The assassins, realizing their fatal mistake, broke and ran. But the beast was too fast. It hunted them down in the mud, tearing them apart with savage, blinding fury. But the bloodlust did not fade when the last assassin fell. The wolf stood panting in the rain, its muzzle stained crimson. It slowly turned its massive head. The beast had taken complete control. There was no trace of the arrogant king left. There was only the Alpha, wounded, enraged, and seeking more prey. Its glowing eyes locked onto Rowan, who was standing a few yards away, his sword drawn but trembling. "Leoric," Rowan pleaded, holding up his hands. "It's me. It's Rowan. Stand down, brother." The beast let out an earth-shattering roar, deafening in its intensity, and stalked toward Rowan. The commander raised his sword, knowing it was useless. The king's guards hesitated, terrified to strike their sovereign, yet knowing they were about to watch their commander die. Inside the tavern, Mave didn't think. She acted on an instinct she couldn't explain. She remembered the stories her grandmother used to whisper to her by the fire, stories of the old world, of the Lycan kin, and the women who possessed the gift of the Anamkar, the soul soothers. Her grandmother had always told Mave she had the touch, a rare calmness in her blood that beasts could sense. Mave threw open the heavy tavern doors and stepped out into the freezing rain. "Stop!" she screamed, her voice cutting through the roar of the storm. The massive black wolf paused, its ears twitching. It slowly turned away from Rowan, its terrifying gaze locking onto Mave. "Mave, get back inside!" Rowan yelled in absolute panic. "He will kill you!" The wolf snarled, a low, rumbling vibration that shook the puddles on the ground. It dropped to all fours, its massive muscles coiling, preparing to pounce and rip the fragile human girl to shreds. Mave didn't retreat. She dropped her rolling pin into the mud. She took a step forward, leaving the safety of the tavern porch. The wolf charged. It closed the distance in a heartbeat, a blur of shadow and teeth lunging directly at her. Women inside the tavern screamed and covered their eyes. Rowan lunged forward, but he was too late. But Mave didn't flinch. She stood her ground, raised her hands, and as the beast leaped, she didn't strike. She reached out. Her small, calloused hands met the thick, coarse fur of the monster's cheeks. She caught the beast mid-lunge, not with strength, but with an overwhelming ancient calm. A shockwave of energy, invisible yet palpable, rippled through the rain-soaked courtyard. The monstrous wolf froze. Its jaws were inches from Mave's face, its hot breath smelling of copper and raw meat washing over her. The beast let out a confused, whining rumble. "Shoo!" Mave whispered, her voice incredibly soft, yet carrying over the rain. She slid her fingers behind the beast's ears, scratching gently but firmly, right where the tension was tightest. She looked directly into those glowing amber eyes, past the monstrous exterior, searching for the man who had mocked her. "The battle is over, Your Grace. You are safe. Rest." The transformation was instant. The murderous rage in the wolf's eyes shattered, replaced by a sudden, overwhelming vulnerability. The beast whimpered, a sound so starkly contrary to its terrifying appearance. Under Mave's gentle, fearless touch, the massive 8-foot monster sagged. Its legs gave out, and it collapsed heavily into the mud at her feet, burying its massive snout into the folds of her soiled, ale-stained apron. Rowan dropped his sword, his mouth hanging open in sheer disbelief. The guards stood frozen like statues. The king, the most dangerous creature in the realm, had been tamed in seconds by the very tavern which he had sworn was beneath his notice. As the beast breathed heavily against her, the coarse black fur began to recede. Bones cracked and shifted as the painful regression back to human form began. Mave sank to her knees in the mud, pulling off her own thick woolen shawl and draping it over the broad, naked shoulders of the shivering king as he returned to his human form. Leoric gasped for air. His human eyes snapped open. He was covered in mud and blood, trembling violently in Mave's arms. He looked up at her, his arrogant pride entirely stripped away, leaving only shock and a strange, newfound reverence. He realized, in that rain-soaked courtyard, that his survival, and perhaps even his soul, now belonged to the woman he had mercilessly mocked. The dawn broke over Oak Haven, not with golden sunlight, but with a bleak, oppressive gray that mirrored the grim reality of the night before. Inside the king's temporary quarters at the inn, Leoric of House Vane lay in a feverish sweat. The silver-tipped arrow had been extracted by Rowan, but the poison of the metal lingered in the king's veins, fighting a violent war against his Lycan healing abilities. Beside his bed sat Mave. She had not slept. She was still wearing her mud-stained dress, her hands stained with the king's blood. When the royal physician had tried to usher her out, Leoric, in a bout of delirious panic, had seized the man by the throat until Mave placed a calming hand on his chest. From that moment on, she was forbidden to leave his side. When Leoric finally opened his eyes, the feral gold was gone, replaced by the exhausted pale amber of a mortal man. He looked at Mave, taking in her bruised wrist, the injury he had caused, and the dark circles beneath her eyes. "Why didn't you run?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. It was not a command. It was a plea for understanding. "I mocked you. I belittled you. I was a monster both in the tavern and in the mud. Why did you save me?" Mave dipped a cloth into a basin of cold water and wrung it out. "Because a crown does not make a man immune to pain, your grace," she replied calmly, dabbing the cool cloth against his burning forehead. "And a monster is often just a creature that has forgotten what it feels like to be touched without fear. In the tavern, you acted like a tyrant. In the courtyard, you were just a wounded animal. I know how to handle animals." Leoric closed his eyes as profound shame washed over his sharp features. "You have bound me to you, Mave of Oak Haven. I owe you a life debt. But more than that, my beast recognizes you, the Anam-Kar. It is a legend I believed had been lost to the ages of my ancestors." He opened his eyes again, his gaze hardening into the resolute stare of a king. "You are coming with me to Ironhold. You will no longer serve ale to drunken swine. You will reside at the royal court under my absolute protection." Mave stiffened. "I am a tavern maid, sire. I do not belong in castles." "You belong wherever you choose," Leoric corrected gently, a stark contrast to his previous arrogance. "But I need you. If Lord Alaric knows my secret, he will strike again. Without your calm, the wolf will tear the capital apart." 3 days later, Mave rode through the towering iron gates of the royal capital. The transition from the muddy, chaotic tavern to the opulent, cutthroat halls of Ironhold was jarring. The court was a viper's nest of silk, perfume, and whispered treachery. The nobility, led by Lady Beatrice of House Whitmore and the scheming Duke Reginald, watched Mave's arrival with undisguised contempt. To them, she was an anomaly. She wore no fine silks, boasted no noble lineage, and yet had been granted chambers in the king's private wing. Rumors spread like wildfire. The official story was that she had saved the king's life through exceptional battlefield medicine. The whispered story was far darker. "They call you a witch," Rowan told her one evening as they walked through the castle gardens. The commander had become a surprising ally, deeply grateful to the woman who had saved his king and his best friend. "Duke Reginald is spreading rumors that you used dark magic to ensnare Leoric's mind. They cannot fathom why the Alpha King, who has rejected the most beautiful highborn ladies in the realm, looks at a peasant girl as if she holds the sun in her hands." Mave stopped to pluck a white rose from a thorny bush. "Let them whisper. I survived Garrett's tavern. I can survive ladies in corsets and lords in powdered wigs. What worries me is Lord Alaric. He is still out there, Rowan." Her fears were justified. Leoric, though recovering, was under immense pressure. The Royal Council demanded retaliation against Alaric's northern territories. But Leoric hesitated, knowing a full-scale war might force him onto the battlefield, where he could lose control and expose his curse to the entire kingdom. That night, Leoric summoned Mave to his private solar. The room was bathed in the warm glow of the hearth. He stood by the window looking out over his kingdom. He had shed his crown and heavy velvet cloaks, wearing only a simple linen shirt and leather breeches. "They hate you because of me," Leoric said without turning around. "Lady Beatrice demanded today that I send you to the dungeons for practicing witchcraft." "And what did you tell her?" Mave asked, stepping closer. Leoric turned, his amber eyes reflecting the firelight. "I told her that if she ever spoke your name with anything less than absolute reverence, I would have her tongue removed and served to the hounds." He took a step toward Mave, the physical distance between them closing, the magnetic pull of the Anam-Kar bond humming in the air between them. "You shouldn't threaten your nobles for me," Mave whispered, though her breath hitched as he reached out, his large, callous thumb gently tracing the line of her jaw. "I would burn this castle to the ground for you," Leoric confessed, his voice dropping an octave, vibrating with the protective instinct of the wolf. "You tamed the beast, Mave, but you have also conquered the man. I spent my life building walls of ice so no one could see the monster within. You walked right through them. Before Mave could reply, the heavy oak doors of the solar burst open. Rowan stood there, his armor dented, his face pale and smeared with soot. "Sire!" Rowan gasped, gripping the hilt of his sword. "It's Leoric. He didn't flee to the north. He brought his army here. They've breached the lower gates, and they are armed with silver." The war horns blew just before midnight. A mournful, bone-rattling drone shook the ancient tapestries of Ironhold. Lord Leoric had not fled north. He had lingered in the shadows, aided by a viper within the king's own council. Duke Reginald, driven by pure spite over a peasant girl's sudden rise in status, had ordered the western postern gate opened, inviting a legion of Alaric's elite northern mercenaries into the castle. Chaos consumed the stone corridors. Mave and Leoric, guarded by a frantic Rowan and a handful of loyalists, sprinted toward the great hall. Blood smeared the polished floors as the clash of steel echoed through the vaulted ceilings. "We must fortify the lower crypts," Rowan shouted over the clamor, parrying a rogue mercenary's blade. "I hide from no man in my own home," Leoric roared back. Yet Mave could see the unnatural sweat glistening on his jaw. The metallic tang of spilled blood and the immediate threat to his mate were tearing at his restraint. His amber eyes violently flickered to a predatory, luminescent gold. They burst through the heavy oak doors of the great hall, seeking a choke point to defend. Instead, they walked directly into the jaws of a trap. Standing arrogantly before the iron-wrought throne was Lord Leoric. Arrayed in a tight semicircle around him were 30 elite crossbowmen. The lethal, pale gleam of pure silver bolts rested in every weapon aimed squarely at the king. "Checkmate, your grace," Leoric drawled, a cruel smirk twisting his scarred face. His eyes shifted from the king to the copper-haired girl at his side. "And this must be the filthy tavern which Reginald warned me you were nothing to look at. A peasant meant only to warm a monster's bed. Keep her name out of your mouth, Leoric, or I will rip your spine from your body." Leoric snarled. The sound was no longer human. It was a dual-layered, monstrous rumble that made several crossbowmen involuntarily step back in terror. Leoric laughed, a sharp, barking sound. "There is the beast. Show us, Leoric. Reveal the abomination that sits upon the throne. If you do not, we will shoot you down like a rabid dog. But if you shift, 30 silver bolts will ensure you never take another breath." Leoric raised his heavily gauntlet hand. "Aim for the wench first. Let us see if the monster truly cares for its pet." 30 crossbows instantly leveled at Mave's chest. Leoric did not hesitate. He did not fight the agonizing shift as he usually did. He threw his entire soul into the curse. With a roar that shattered the towering stained-glass windows of the hall, the Alpha King unleashed his true form. His armor shredded into useless metal fragments as the massive 8-foot-tall black wolf materialized. A terrifying engine of muscle, shadow, and lethal fangs. But as the beast braced itself to absorb the deadly silver volley in order to protect her, Mave acted. She did not cower. She slammed both hands onto the wolf's thick, muscular flank. She poured every ounce of her unyielding courage, mental clarity, and deep, anchoring trust into their psychic bond. "I am here. Do not drown in the blood. Fight as a king." The beast paused for the briefest fraction of a heartbeat. It did not blindly charge in a feral rage. Calculated. It fought with the tactical brilliance of Leoric of House Vane. "Fire!" Leoric screamed. The silver bolts rained down. Moving with impossible speed, the wolf snatched a massive, heavy oak banquet table in its jaws, flipping it upward like a giant wooden shield. The silver bolts thudded uselessly into the thick timber. Before a single archer could reload, the Alpha was upon them. It was a terrifying display of controlled violence. The wolf shattered crossbows with crushing jaws and swatted men across the marble floor, incapacitating them with blunt force rather than lethal claws. The beast was fully weaponized, yet entirely leashed by the soul of the woman standing behind it. Leoric, screaming in sheer panic, drew a silver-coated long sword and charged. The wolf casually sidestepped the desperate strike. In a blur of black fur, the Alpha's jaws clamped over Alaric's heavily armored wrist, snapping the bone with a sickening crunch. Alaric dropped the sword, howling in agony as the wolf pinned him flat against the cold marble floor. The heavy hall doors burst open again. Rowan and a massive contingent of the king's guard poured in, stopping dead in their tracks. The entire royal court, dragged from their beds by the commotion, stood clustered behind the guards, staring in absolute, breathless horror at the giant black wolf pinning a high lord to the ground. The kingdom's darkest secret was finally laid bare. Slowly, the massive beast released Alaric. It stalked through the center of the utterly silent hall, stopping directly in front of Mave. The courtiers gasped, certain the monster was about to devour the fragile girl. Instead, the monstrous wolf bowed its heavy head, gently pressing its blood-stained snout against Mave's stomach in a profound display of absolute submission. Mave smiled softly, burying her hands into his coarse, dark fur and scratching him gently behind the ears. In a ripple of shifting bone and receding fur, the beast melted away. King Leoric rose to his feet, naked, bruised, and human. Rowan swiftly stepped forward, draping a heavy velvet cloak over his king's shoulders. Leoric turned his piercing, calm amber eyes upon his stunned court. Lord Alaric is guilty of high treason. Throw him into the dark cells, Leoric commanded, his voice cracking like a whip. He looked at the trembling nobles. For centuries, the House of Vane hid the truth of our blood, fearing your terror. Today you witnessed the beast, and you witnessed that it is not a mindless killer. It is the ultimate protector of this realm. Leoric turned back to Mave, taking her rough, calloused hands in his own. Then, the ruthless, terrifying Alpha King sank to one knee on the blood-stained marble floor. I mocked you because I was a fool who believed cruelty was strength, Leoric declared, his voice echoing through the vast, silent hall. You taught me that true power is the courage to offer a monster grace. You are my Anam Kar, my soul soother, my equal. He looked up, a rare, breathtaking smile breaking through his normally stoic features. Will you, Mave of Oak Haven, stand by my side? Not as a ward, but as my mate and the queen of Ethalgard. Mave looked at the kneeling king, feeling the unyielding bond that tied their souls together. I will, Mave replied, her voice steady and loud enough for every lord and lady to hear. But if you ever spill mead on my apron again, your crown won't save you. Leoric's genuine, rumbling laughter filled the great hall, washing away the dark shadows of his curse forever. Did this tale of the fierce Alpha King and his fearless, quick-witted tavern maid leave you breathless? Don't miss out on more epic romances, thrilling werewolf lore, and dark medieval fantasies. If you loved Mave's courage and Leoric's incredible transformation, smash that like button, share this story with your fellow fantasy lovers, and subscribe to our channel for new, heart-pounding stories every single week. Drop a comment below. What would you do if a werewolf charged at you? See you in the next adventure.